Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. Many people went to church at one time in their lives, but there wasn't enough in those services or fellowship to keep them there. And a new style of church is growing in North America and Western Europe, one that has turned away from many aspects of traditional Christianity. So today we're going to talk with one of the prominent authors of the Emergent Church movement. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Peter Rollins, philosopher and founder of the Ikon Emergent community in Northern Ireland. His books, How Not to Speak About God and The Fidelity of Betrayal, have caused quite a stir in the Emergent Church movement in the U.S. and the U.K. So we've asked him to come and talk about them and the movement. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks for having me.
So how do we define this Emergent Church movement?
Okay, that's a difficult question, and in some respects there's as many definitions as there are people who are involved in the movement. I suppose one way of approaching a definition is to say that there is a concern with the emphasis on belief. So often churches, what's important is what you believe rather than how you believe it. There's no parable that talks about two rabbis who are arguing about a passage in the Torah, and they've been arguing for 20 years, and sometimes they change their minds and sometimes they disagree, but they've never been able to find unity. And finally God gets so annoyed by listening to these guys constantly talking about this passage that he says to the angels, I'm going to go down and I'm going to tell them what this verse means.
Get it over with.
Yeah, absolutely. So God comes down, parts the clouds, says to the rabbis, I've listened to you argue for 20 years, I'll tell you what it means. And in a rare moment of unity, the two rabbis turn around to God and say, what right have you to come down from heaven and tell us what it means? You go back to heaven and let us argue about it. Now, what I love about this Jewish parable is that what's important is not the God's eye view, not the right interpretation, but the fact that you're engaged in a dialogue, that you're being Israel, you're fighting, you're wrestling with the text. And a lot of the people in the emerging conversation, they view the Bible and they view their tradition not in terms of getting the right answer, but like a piece of art in an art museum, that you go and what's important is not that you interpret it correctly, but that you love the piece of art, that you're engaged with it, that it transforms you, that you're changed in your interaction with it. And that's why we have to go back to our favourite pieces of art. We don't just look at them once and leave. It's because they'll always speak to us in different ways, that we can't reduce it to a singular meaning. It speaks in a multitude of ways.
Can't it be both, though? Because when I heard the rabbi story, I thought to myself, oh, how disrespectful to God. What a rare moment to hear what it was really true. And perhaps the Bible has told us about God or how God is, and we're ignoring it just so that we can wrestle. On the other hand, wrestling is very important. It can't be static. We have to always be thinking about how am I living this out. So why does it only have to be wrestling?
Yep, and I totally agree. For me, it's just as important to name God as it is to dename God. It's just as important to say, God is love, as it is to go, but not like I understand it. As a 21st century Irish guy, my understanding of love is different from a 3rd century Spanish mystic. And so that's why I talk about Christianity as atheistic. Because theism, for me, it's the definition of God. If I ask you, are you a theist, and you say yes, I can ask you, well, what God do you believe in? Because you have an idea in your head. If I ask you, are you an atheist, and you say yes, I can ask you, what God do you not believe in? Because again, you're rejecting an idea of God. And for me, the early Christians were called atheists for two reasons.
Called atheists?
Atheists, yeah. The early Christians were called atheists because they disbelieved in the Roman gods. They disbelieved in those gods. But at a more radical
The Roman
level,
gods? So
yeah.
so all the gods at the time,
yes,
right, which was very important to the Romans,
were rejected.
Right. The new Christians said
yes,
no.
No. But in a more radical way, they also, in a sense, disbelieved in their own God. They always said, my ideas of God are never enough. God is more wonderful than I could ever describe, more gracious, that God is, the word I love, hyperanonymous. Hyperanonymous is like anonymous, but you don't know because there's an excess. It's like being a ship sunken in the depths of the ocean. While the ocean contains the ship, and the ship contains the ocean contains the entire ship, while the ship only contains a fragment of the ocean. And so it's like trying to get the whole ocean in our minds, the whole of God in our minds. So for me, we name God, theism, and we also then say, but we're atheists as well. We say, no, but that doesn't reach God. God is bigger than that.
So we want to keep the wonder of God and the mystery of God.
Yes.
And what about then, how do the Psalms fit in, where they name all the attributes of God?
Yeah.
Can we claim those as, yes, I know the God that the Bible has explained to me, while hanging on to the fact that I'm a limited person,
Yeah.
and therefore there's more?
Yes. Well, what I love about the attributes of God in the Psalms and in the Bible is that there's so many of them, and actually they don't fit well together. That if somebody says, the unnameable doesn't reduce us to silence. It actually sparks us off to have a multitude of names. So we have God as warrior, God as peacemaker, God who sees everything, God who's blind to the cries of the people, a God who is everywhere, and yet a God who fails to see something. You've got these analogies and these names, and they clash. And for me, that's such an exciting thing, because that's what you would expect. All these metaphors and names, they clash together, and God is not described in one, or described in some way of trying to mix them all together. God is the antagonism. God is the explosion that creates these names. So in one sense, God is not the patch of meaning on the wound of our unknowing. God is the wound that generates our patches, that generates the names. So if you take someone like Richard Dawkins, he might say, if you get an encyclopedia of gods, he says, right, on page 365, there's the Christian God. So we all disbelieve in the gods from page 1 to page 364. Then you believe in the God on page 365, and then we don't believe in the rest of them.
So you think Dawkins has too small an idea of who God is?
Yes, because what he's doing is he's saying, you just believe in one extra God than us. But I think that the Christian notion is saying, no, God is not the name. God is that which generates the name. God is that which generates the words that we use.
So what is the Emergent Church, as you have created it at the Ikon community, what is it trying to solve? What problem do you think that the present church has that you feel you're doing an antidote to?
Yeah. I mean, partly for me, the problem is churches have found it very difficult to embrace diversity of belief. In Ikon, we have liberal and we have conservative, we have Protestant and we have Catholic, we have theist and we have atheist, who all meet together. And that's very key. And the way we do this is we do what's called suspended space, where we ask everybody
suspended space?
Yes, that's my Irish accent, suspended space. And what I mean by that is we ask everybody who enters the bar to act as if there is no Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female, conservative or liberal. We ask people to theatrically imagine that they're stepping out of historical time and they're living the eschaton, they're living the kingdom of God. Now, I can't really forget that I'm a guy, so it's a theatrical performance. But what we do is we ask everybody to lay aside their ideas just for 1 hour.
And it's 1 hour a month in a pub.
In a pub. Now we have other gatherings which I might mention briefly, but this main gathering is this suspended space where we say, let's try to lay down our theological positions so that we can encounter one another. There's a beautiful line.
But is that because God is in the one or another? I mean, why would we have to suspend everything in order to be the kingdom of God?
Yeah. Well, for me, I mean, Emmanuel Levinas, the Jewish philosopher, has a beautiful line, and he says, if you see the colour of somebody's eyes, you are not relating to them. And what he means by that is, if you're watching someone and you see their hair and their eye colour, you're not really listening. You've got what Martin Buber would call an I-it relationship. You're treating them as an object. But then you get into a really good conversation, and suddenly I don't see the colour of your eyes anymore. I don't see the way your hair is, because we're really engaging. And for me, this is what suspended space is. It's saying that our positions are incredibly important. What you think about sexuality, what you think about politics, these are things that we have to debate in the world. But for 1 hour, let's try to encounter beyond our positions so that I really kind of meet you at a deeper level.
Can I ask, how will you know when you've arrived at this suspended space or deeper level? I mean, it sounds almost transcendent, that somehow I've stripped myself of all my beliefs and the sort of impressions I have of people, and how do I know that I've actually arrived at that ultimate suspended space place?
Yeah, in one sense, well, we never do. And in Ikon, that's the thing, we'd say this is just a performance, it's a pretend, it's an act. We never really can fully do it. But it's a sense in which we try to say we are all instruments of each other's further conversion. So we say to everybody in the room, you be open to the person on the other side of the table being an instrument of your further transformation. And by asking people to do that, they in a sense have to lay down their positions. If you're a Republican or a Democrat, in one sense you have to lay that aside, and you have to say, okay, you teach me, you know. And the big thing is, so as not to offend anybody, we try to offend everybody. So equally, if you're Republican or Democrat, we're asking both to lay down their views. Right. So nobody feels got at, because everybody's being told to do the same thing.
Right. So are you trying to eliminate what you think is prejudice and exclusion that you see happens in church because people are concentrating on people's beliefs or opinions? So it becomes sort of silo, and you're trying to create a whole because people have left all those things at the door?
Yeah, and in many respects, the church, as far as I can see, has often been so, as we mentioned earlier, you know, it's so about what you believe. So do you believe Jesus died for your sins, you can reconcile to God? And if you believe that, then there's behaviour comes next. You pray and you repent. And then belonging, then you enter into the religious community and you take part of the religious community. What we're trying to say is, let's turn it around. Like an infant, a baby is born into a family and belongs before there's any belief or behaviour. And then as the child grows, there's some shared behaviour. They eat at a certain time, they go for walks on a Sunday. And then lastly, belief comes. And at first it's the same as the parents, then it's diametrically opposed in adolescence, say, and then eventually it comes to some sort of equilibrium. And I want to say that this is what church should be like, that we belong together, we share the rituals together, and belief, you know, we all doubt, we all have concerns, let's be honest about that. But what's most important is that we're together, we're engaged with the discussion, and we're, you know.
But how about, that sounds very appealing, because really people don't change their behavior until they feel safe, until they have a sense of belonging, they feel accepted, and they feel loved, which is so central to faith, Christianity. And then, but the belief part, do you believe that you need to believe in Jesus to have salvation for the afterlife?
If you believe in the resurrection, but it actually doesn't do anything to your life, for me that's not the truth. Right. What's important is it transforms you. So whenever Jesus was asked, you know, he said to Peter, who do people say I am? And he answers, and he says, who do you say I am? And he says, I think you're the Messiah. And then Jesus says, tell everybody. No, he says, tell nobody. Right. It's almost like, that belief's not important. That could get in the way. So for me, Christians aren't called to believe in the resurrection. They're called to be the resurrection, to live it in their lives.
Be the resurrection.
Yes.
What would that look like? How would I know that?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's where you become the imitation of Christ, where we look out for those who are hungry, we look out for those who are being tortured, we give clothes to those who are naked. Okay. Now, but it's not just kind of like reducing Christianity to some sort of ethical code, because for me, the idea of rebirth is vital to Christianity. In Northern Ireland, we all have, you know, the sandwich boards, and you must be born again. And I think there's something key, actually, about that verse. That birth, the interesting thing about birth is you don't experience birth. Birth is what allows you to experience. So I don't experience life. It's life that allows me to experience. And I don't see the light in this room. It's the light that allows me to see. In the same way, for me, Christianity is not something you can grasp. It's what changes how you grasp everything. So God doesn't enter the world as an object that I can talk about. God is that which changes how I interact with all objects. God is that which transforms my experience so that I become like Christ. And so that means I can't actually pin God down and talk about God absolutely. I can use some words, but they always fall short. God is that which actually makes me somebody who looks like Christ and acts like Christ.
And the way that you've set up the Ikon community is a way to help people really become what sounded sort of inside out, upside down, right? To rethink in the opposite way some of the things. And by that reversal of thinking, you're hoping that people shed what is fake and inauthentic and become more authentically Christ followers.
Yes.
Would that be fair?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the way we shake people up is we create various groups. We've got a group called the Omega Course, which is kind of like the Alpha Course in reverse. It's exiting Christianity in 12 weeks. We're exiting your understanding of Christianity in 12 weeks. And that's designed to cause people to think about things differently. We have a group called Atheism for Lent, where we read all the atheistic philosophers, Nietzsche, Feuerbach, Marx and Freud, not to judge them, but to let them judge us. And we have a group called the Evangelism Project, where we go out to be evangelized, where we go to other religious communities to be transformed. All of these are there to provoke and to change and to get people to wonder, is Christianity just a belief system, or is it something more fundamental?
It sounds to me like when you really want people to continue to own and hang on strongly to truth. And I wonder if you mean by truth, and we'll come back to this, Jesus Christ is truth. So when you go to these other religions, is that so that you'll continually re-engage with Jesus? Or would it be okay if some of your members said, hey, now that I've engaged that religion, I'm finding that very interesting, so I'm just going to move over there. Would that be okay?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't stop anybody, you know. But and perhaps I would disagree. So we went to visit the Scientologists recently, for example, and if somebody had come out of that saying, I'd like to be part of Scientology, I would have been slightly concerned. But for me, that's all religion is human. So I would be arguing that Scientology is bad because, you know, of what it does to you. For me,
you would
yes,
argue that?
Absolutely. For me, absolutism, where you think God tells us all the answers, stops us from thinking for ourselves. And relativism, which says, oh, everything's equal, that stops us thinking for ourselves. For me, we as human beings have to look at evidence, we have to think, we have to judge, and so there's a responsibility to critique Christianity and other religions purely on the evidence of, does it make you into a more beautiful person or does it destroy you? So I would argue against Scientology, but not because, you know, God whispered in my ear, but simply because I look at it and go, there are serious problems here. Because for me, Christianity is not a worldview. It doesn't tell us anything about the world. It doesn't give us a cosmology that would somehow contradict what some physicist would say. It doesn't give us an anthropology that would contradict what somebody in a university says. Christianity doesn't define life. It brings life. It doesn't describe life. It brings abundant life.
A Christian worldview brings abundant life?
No, I think actually there's no such thing as a Christian worldview. There are some books that say, you know, it would compare Christianity to humanism, to Marxism. For me, you know, you can be a Christian Marxist, you can be a Christian capitalist. That Christianity isn't a worldview that can be compared to other worldviews. It doesn't give a description of the world. It actually helps you engage in the world differently.
Well, let me give you this sort of worldview and critique it for me.
Oh yeah.
We believe that God created everything. Sin entered the world, and if you look around, there's certainly evidence that things are not the way they should be.
Yes, absolutely.
And then Christ came and brought about the hope of and actual redemption to be restored then later on because of his continuing care. And we as Christians continually get to be part of that restoration, as you said, to feed the hungry or to address the poor, visit the sick, address individuals in prison, etc. So this creation idea, this fall, redemption and restoration, is that not a worldview that helps us live out being a Christian? Critique that.
Yeah, I'm not too sure if it does. There's lots of people who believe that,
right.
And obviously maybe who don't
right.
live it. And I think often Christian truth can become something you affirm intellectually but doesn't make a change. There's no anecdote, if I can tell you, about this minister. She's sitting reading one Sunday morning and a parishioner knocks on the door. She opens the door. He's in a cold sweat. He's obviously very, very concerned. And she asks, what's wrong? And he says, well, there's this family lives down the road. The guy lost his job, got no money, they can't pay the rent. She looks after her sick mother who lives with them. They've got 4 kids. It's the middle of winter, but if they don't pay their rent by tomorrow, the landlord's going to kick them out. So the minister goes, that's terrible, I'll get some money from the church. And she says, well, how do you know this family? And he says, oh, I'm the landlord, right? Now, the interesting thing is, he has this belief,
right.
oh, that, you know, they should be looked after. He has this belief that, oh, you know, we have to care for those people. And yet he doesn't live it.
Right.
He's actually the problem. And so for me, I actually don't care in one sense whether someone believes Jesus is the Messiah or anything like that if that belief isn't expressed in their life. Now, I think the belief is brilliant and I will hold to the belief, but I want to say the belief is nothing if it doesn't make you into a more beautiful person, if it isn't expressed in the job you choose, in the car you drive, in the clothes you buy, then it's nothing.
If I'm a person who is seeking deeper meaning in my life, and I come to you and I say, Peter, who is God? Mm-hmm. What would you tell me?
Yep. Well, anybody who comes to me seeking meaning, I won't want to talk to them about God at all, because they're not seeking God, they're seeking meaning. If I'm single and I'm looking for someone to go out with, I might have lots of characteristics I'm looking for, but I'm not seeking a particular person, I'm seeking the characteristics. When I meet somebody in a pub or a cafe, then suddenly I start desiring them. I can't desire someone until I meet them, because I've not met them. You know,
Right.
I can't desire someone until
Right,
I've got.
right,
You know,
right.
and then and what happens is then retroactively I go, I never knew I needed you until I met you, and now I realise I've always needed you. It's the same with a child. If someone has a baby, before they've had the child, they might think they're complete, and then they have a baby and they said, I was never complete until the baby arrived. Now the truth is that's a retroactive need. Once the baby's born, they then say, I never needed you until you were born.
So you have to meet God
Yes.
in order to think
meet
that
God.
you need God.
Yeah.
Okay, so I come to you and I say, Peter, how do I meet God? What do you tell me?
Wow. It happens all the time, you know, people coming up and asking that question.
Yes.
No. Well, what I would try and do is, instead of giving the answers, because that's what I used to do. In my past, I used to always give an answer. I want to not give an answer. I want to simply say, ask, seek. So if someone comes to me and says, Peter, does love exist? I don't want to sit down and tell them why I think love exists. I want to say, go and do what lovers do. So if someone comes to me and says, does God exist? I don't want to give them a list of answers. I want to say, go and do what people who believe in God do. Give to the poor, pray, meditate, fast, do the activities, and in doing that, you may find the truth. So I want to hold back. I'm not going to give them a list of answers. I just want to simply say, you go and do what people who believe do, and see if you can find the truth for yourself.
So do you think that that's what Mother Teresa did? In some ways, people would come and they would want to work at the House of the Dying. And she would say, well, come and work. And it was in actually serving the people who were dying or the people who were very sick that they actually met God.
Absolutely, 100%. It's in the activities, and that's what Pascal understood. So that's why he was against apologetics. And he believed in the Bible, he believed that, but he said, no, do the activities, come to church, pray with me, read the Bible, serve the poor, and you will find the truth in that engagement. And amazingly, Mother Teresa, as we found out, was full of doubts and uncertainties. And people found that very terrifying when they realised. But for me, that makes what she did even better.
Right.
She said, I have all these doubts, I'm not sure whether God is there sometimes. And yet every day she still got up and she still acted like God.
Your background as a philosopher obviously has set some very rich foundation for this. And is your philosophy, as talked about in your books, as written about there, does that represent the U.S. church as well, the U.S. emergent movement?
Yeah, I think a lot of what I was writing about in How Not to Speak of God and Fidelity of Betrayal resonates with what's happening in various groups around around America. The idea of creating this suspended place beyond liberal and conservative and Protestant and Catholic. The idea of trying to emphasize belonging and shared rituals and shared behaviour over shared belief. The concern that religion is often so much about what you believe that it doesn't make many demands on you in terms of your practice. All of these things, I think, are resonating in America as well as the UK.
So because you are so published on this topic, how do you feel about being seen more and more as sort of the head of this movement, or the founder and one of the heads of the movement, at least?
Oh, an Ikon, or
Right. Someone
right.
to look to. No, of the Emergent
Of
Church,
Emergent, yeah.
because you've been writing about it.
Yes. Well, for me, there is a vital role for leadership, and the role of the leader is this: to refuse to be a leader. So the role of a priest is to refuse priesthood, and by refusing priesthood, they force a priesthood of all believers. So the example I would use would be in an analysis. If I'm with a counsellor, people think the analyst is there to analyse the behaviour of the person who's visiting, but actually the analyst is there to refuse to be an analyst, to push back the interpretation so that the person has to interpret for themselves. And in the same way, I see that a role of a Christian leader is to refuse to be a leader, always pushing back so that people are responsible for themselves. Right. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm happy to be seen as a kind of a figure and a leader in this community, because what I do with that is I push back and I try to refuse that position.
Okay, so you serve, you by calling necessity, giftedness, whatever, you are going to be seen as a leader. And then one of the responsibilities you have as a leader is to say, oh, it's on you too.
Yes.
Keep going. This is what you have to do.
And so, and that's a vital role. You have to have a leader who refuses to be a leader. Now, and this is what I see God doing, and the Bible doing. Every time we try to push out and say, this is what God is, this is who God is, God says, my name is above every name. Every time we try to say, oh, God thinks this, God seems to come along and say, oh, no, my ways are not your ways. Every time we say to Jesus, good teacher, he says, who's good?
But there's something about Jesus that said, I will be an example for you. I mean, I will show you the way, and I will say that this is the best way.
Yeah, and yet, in one sense, disappears sometimes the moment that we want to grasp God, and in the road to Emmaus, the moment we try to nail God down, nail Jesus down, he's gone. An example I would use is this: Jesus comes and says, if someone asks you to carry a pack 1 mile, carry it 2. Now, what I want to imagine is if a Christian community did that,
yes.
and they religiously carried the pack 2 miles and
Yes.
set it down, and then we have to imagine Jesus coming back.
Right.
What would he say? Would he say, well done, my good and faithful servants, you've carried the pack 2 miles? Or would he say, your law says carry the pack 2 miles, I say carry it 3? In other words, for me, Jesus is teaching an ethic of love and excess, and it's not something we can pin down. And if we try to look at what Jesus did and literally follow it in every way, we're missing the point. We're missing the point.
Thank you, Peter. My guest today has been Peter Rollins, author of the books How Not to Speak with God and The Fidelity of Betrayal, and a respected voice in the Emergent Church movement. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.